Patch 13.9 is almost upon us with some nerfs, some buffs, and some other changes too, including a crazy rework for Neeko. The first nerf goes to Jinx, who is losing a small amount of attack damage growth each level. Where this isn't a massive change, she has been dominant recently, so this should bring her slightly back in line with other hyper carries. With the only other nerf going to Sion, affecting the most annoying part of his kit, where his passive will now decay even more health as he's leveled up, giving him smaller windows to get value out of his passive. The first buff goes to Aatrox, whose passive will now deal even more maximum health damage, scaling with his levels. And the movement speed on his ultimate is being increased at all ranks. These buffs are pretty strong and may well put him back at the top again. Next we have Amumu, whose W will now deal 20 flat damage at all ranks. This is a large amount more at rank 1, but significantly less when fully leveled. In addition, it will deal even more percent health damage as the ability is leveled up. This should be a pretty strong buff for Amumu, as his W is often the last thing he levels. So this large amount of additional damage early game should help both his clear and damage when fighting. Following this we have Swain, whose Q will now deal an additional 5 damage at all ranks and scales slightly better with AP. It will also deal 3 more damage with each additional bolt hitting, and the maximum potential damage of the ability is having its flat damage increased and its AP scaling. Next we have Trundle, who is getting additional base attack speed and a large amount of additional base mana. Both of these increases are great quality of life changes and should help him both in the top lane and the jungle. And the final buff goes to Volibear, whose W will now deal slightly more bonus health damage and heal him even more missing health. Where this shouldn't make Volibear the beast he was in Season 12, this should go a long way to restoring some of his glory. We also have several adjustments, with the first one going to Belveth, who is losing 0.2 attack damage per level, but her Q will now deal more damage to monsters. This will make her jungle clear stronger at the cost of a small amount of combat damage. Next we have Kayle, who is losing some AP scaling on her E, but the passive flat damage will be higher to compensate. We also have massive changes to her ultimate, where it will now take only half a second to cast. In addition, it will cast in a much larger area and even larger again as it's leveled. She will always be invulnerable for 2.5 seconds. It takes longer for the swords to fall, and when they do, it deals slightly less flat damage as it's leveled and has worse AP scaling. But incredibly importantly, she no longer lowers her range when using the ultimate. This means while being ultimate, she'll still be absolutely slapping away on you. Overall, this is looking like a pretty solid buff, as even though she's losing some damage, she'll more than make up for it by being able to attack. And the final change goes to Talia, where she no longer gets locked out from casting her ultimate while dealing damage, which means she'll only be locked out now while taking damage. But all of this aside, we have massive changes to Neeko, which are incredibly fun. I'll be going over her changes in even more detail in a video tomorrow. However, when she's near a non-epic monster, minion, trap, ward, or plant, she can store them in herself. She can then activate the ability to become that unit, and she can then click on her face to return herself to herself. Which means, yes, she can actually change into non-epic monsters, minions, traps, wards, or plants. Her disguise will no longer break when taking damage and only when she would die. However, she won't get her target's attack speed and movement speed anymore. In addition, her Q now deals additional damage to monsters. When using W, she can recast it to send the clone to a new location. And the clone will now do things like using abilities and doing things like dancing, joking, and recalling. The flat damage on her E is being tuned down, however will get slightly higher AP scaling. And her ultimate has a far longer cooldown early game and deal far less flat damage and scaling damage and no longer grant a shield. All these changes for Neeko are pretty wild and it'll be very interesting to see how she ends up. And Lichbane is getting 10 additional AP.